On the morning of August 3rd, 1994, 7 men left the Blackwater logging camp in northern Montana and drove 23 miles into the Flathead National Forest. By 4:00 p.m. that same day, all 7 were dead, scattered across a half-mile stretch of timberland, each one eliminated with precision from distances exceeding 300 yards. The shooter, Marcus Webb, a 41-year-old former Army Ranger and timber cruiser, working alone from elevated positions he'd scouted weeks earlier. Montana State Police would later call it the most methodical lone gunman massacre in state history. But the reason behind the killings wasn't mental illness, wasn't terrorism, wasn't a random shooting spree. It was a 200-acre timber parcel that Marcus Webb's grandfather homesteaded in 1923, land that corporate logging companies took through legal maneuvering Marcus considered theft, and one man's absolute conviction that sometimes the law protects the wrong people. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events and explores the darkest edges of vigilante justice. Flathead County, Montana, stretched across 5,098 square miles of Rocky Mountain terrain in 1994, ranging from the Canadian border down through Glacier National Park and the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Population stood around 60,000, most concentrated in Kalispell and Whitefish, leaving vast swaths of forest, mountain, and valleys where humans were visitors, and nature still made the rules. The national forest itself covered over 2 million acres, pine and fir trees rising 80 feet tall, valleys so deep and remote that helicopter crashes from the 1970s still hadn't been recovered, their wreckage hidden beneath decades of fallen needles and snow. August in Flathead meant hot days pushing 85 degrees, cool nights dropping to 45, and air so dry it made your throat raw by mid-afternoon. The smell was pure Montana, pine resin baking in the sun, creek water running cold over granite, and wood smoke from distant campfires drifting through the valleys. Mornings brought mist that hung in the trees until 9 a.m., turning the forest into something from a dream where distances became impossible to judge and sounds echoed off invisible walls of vapor. But 1994 was a devastating year for small timber operations in Montana. The logging industry that had sustained rural communities for generations was being consolidated, bought out, and eliminated by massive corporations with lawyers, lobbyists, and political connections that family operations couldn't match. Regulations that seemed designed to favor large companies while crushing small ones. Environmental restrictions that locked up timberland under the guise of conservation while corporate operations somehow found loopholes. And legal battles that drained family savings faster than medical bills, leaving men who'd worked timber for 3 generations suddenly facing bankruptcy and foreclosure. Marcus Clayton Webb was born on March 17, 1953 in Columbia Falls, Montana, in a cabin his grandfather built with timber, cut from land they'd homesteaded 3 decades earlier. The property, 200 acres along Blackwater Creek, had been in the Webb family since Marcus's grandfather, Thomas Webb, filed his homestead claim in 1923, carved a life out of wilderness that tried to kill him every winter. Thomas logged selectively, cut only what he needed, replanted what he took, and passed the land to his son, Daniel Webb, who passed it to Marcus with one instruction: don't lose it. Family land stays family land. Marcus was 6'2", lean and hard, with hands that were all callus and scar tissue from 4 decades working timber. His face looked carved from the same wood he logged, weathered and lined, with gray-green eyes that rarely blinked and a mouth that rarely smiled. A thick beard, more gray than brown by 1994, covered a jawline broken twice in bar fights during his 20s, healed crooked because he never bothered seeing a doctor. He walked with the easy balance of someone completely comfortable in terrain that would break city people's ankles, moving through dense forest as quietly as deer, reading the land the way other men read newspapers. Every morning, Marcus woke at 5:00 a.m., made coffee in a pot so old his grandmother had used it, and walked the property line of his 200 acres. 2 hours every single day, checking boundary markers, looking for poacher signs, feeling the land the way a captain feels his ship. He'd stop at his grandfather's grave, a simple stone near a massive ponderosa pine Thomas had refused to cut. Marcus would stand there for 5 minutes, not praying exactly, just acknowledging, remembering, promising that the land would stay Webb land as long as he was breathing. He'd married Sarah Kemp in 1975, a Kalispell girl whose father ran a hardware store. They had 3 children: Thomas, named after Marcus's grandfather, born in 1976, Ellen, born in 1978, and Michael, born in 1981. Sarah was 40 now, a woman with sun-damaged skin and hands as rough as her husband's from 3 decades helping run a small logging operation. She kept the books, managed permits, dealt with customers, and worried constantly about money, regulations, and the growing sense that their way of life was being systematically dismantled by people who'd never held a chainsaw. What Marcus valued most wasn't money, though God knew they struggled. What he valued was continuity, the idea that land meant something, that promises made by grandfathers to grandsons mattered, that a man's word and a handshake still counted for more than lawyers and contracts. His grandfather had homesteaded this land legally, worked it honestly, paid taxes for 71 years. To Marcus, that created an obligation that went beyond property law, something spiritual, something sacred that couldn't be bought or litigated away. The timber on those 200 acres represented everything: his family's history, his children's inheritance, his connection to grandfathers and great-grandfathers who'd bled and sweated and frozen to carve civilization out of wilderness. Every tree was familiar, known, cataloged in Marcus's memory, like other men remember their children's birthdays. Blackwater Timber Corporation was a regional operation based in Missoula, bought out in 1992 by Consolidated Forest Products, a subsidiary of a subsidiary owned by a hedge fund in Connecticut. The new ownership brought new management, lawyers from Seattle, accountants from Denver, executives who'd never set foot in Montana before being assigned to squeeze maximum profit from timber operations they viewed as underperforming assets on balance sheets. The regional manager was Walter Keene, 48 years old, MBA from Stanford, 15 years climbing the corporate ladder by cutting costs and maximizing quarterly returns. He wore expensive hiking boots that had never been dirty, LL Bean catalog clothes that looked like costume, and spoke about harvesting timber assets and optimizing yield per acre like he was discussing corn futures instead of 100-year-old trees. His crew included James Rutledge, operations manager, 52, former Marine who'd done 2 tours in Vietnam before getting into logging, good at his job but better at following orders. Carl Morrison, timber cruiser, 38, who'd grown up in Montana but worked for whoever paid the most. Dean Foster and Rick Patterson, both Sawyers in their 30s, competent professionals with families and mortgages, and Tyler and Brian Simmons, brothers, equipment operators, 29 and 26, who drove the skidders and loaders. These weren't villains in their own minds. They were men doing jobs, following orders, supporting families in an economy that offered fewer options every year. Walter Keene genuinely believed he was optimizing resources. James Rutledge believed good soldiers followed the chain of command. The Simmons brothers believed you did your job, took your paycheck, and kept your head down. The conflict between Marcus Webb and Blackwater Timber Corporation began in June 1993, when surveyors appeared on Marcus's property without permission, placing stakes, taking measurements, treating his land like it was theirs. Marcus confronted them politely. "This is private property, Webb family land. You're trespassing." The lead surveyor, a young man from Missoula, looked at his clipboard. "According to our records, this parcel is designated as BTC Holdings. We have authorization to survey." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Your records are wrong. This land has been in my family since 1923. Homestead claim, continuously occupied. I have the deed." The surveyor shrugged. "I just work here, man. You have issues, take it up with the office." He went back to his measurements. Marcus drove to the Blackwater Timber office in Whitefish that afternoon. He brought his grandfather's homestead, papers, his father's deed transfer, tax records going back to 1923, every piece of documentation proving Webb ownership. He asked to speak with whoever was in charge. Walter Keene agreed to meet him, though the secretary made Marcus wait 45 minutes as a power play. When he finally entered Keene's office, Marcus laid his paperwork on the desk. "Your people were surveying my land today. I need you to understand this is a mistake." Keene didn't look at the documents. "Mr. Webb, there's no mistake. Blackwater Timber Corporation acquired this parcel through judicial sale following tax delinquency proceedings. The transfer was recorded with the county in April." Marcus felt his throat go tight. "Tax delinquency? I pay my taxes every year, on time." Keene pulled a file from his desk, slid it across. Property taxes were increased in 1992 following reassessment. You received notice of the increase in payment deadline. When payment wasn't received by the deadline, the county held a tax sale. Blackwater purchased the parcel. It's all legal. Marcus opened the file. There was notice dated August 1992, addressed to Webb M. Blackwater Creek property. He'd never seen it, had never received it. This wasn't delivered to me. I never got this. It was mailed to the address on record. If you didn't receive it, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't invalidate the process. You had 120 days to redeem after sale. That period expired in February. The land is now owned by Blackwater Timber Corporation. For how much? What was the tax bill? Keene checked the file. $14,273. Marcus wanted to vomit. $14,000, his grandfather's land, his family's legacy, 71 years of history, taken for $14,000 in taxes he was never properly notified about. I'll pay it now, today, plus penalties, whatever it takes. The redemption period is closed. The property is transferred. There's no mechanism to reverse it. Then I'll buy it back. Name your price. Keene smiled, the way people smile when explaining simple concepts to children. Mr. Webb, this parcel contains approximately 200 acres of mature timber with an estimated board-foot yield worth $750,000 at current market rates. Blackwater has no interest in selling. We'll be harvesting this autumn. Marcus's hands were shaking now. You can't harvest that land. Half those trees were planted by my grandfather. Some of those pines are 150 years old. That's sacred ground. My grandfather's buried there. We'll work around the grave site. Montana law requires that. Work around it, you'll clear-cut everything else. We'll conduct a commercial harvest according to best practices and federal regulations. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loud against the floor. Every man in his family for 3 generations had worked that land, had protected it, had promised to pass it down. And now, some MBA from California was going to turn it into profit margins and quarterly reports. This isn't right. Keene stood as well, signaling the meeting was over. It's legal, Mr. Webb. I understand you're emotional about this, but emotion doesn't change property law. If you feel the tax sale was improper, you can file suit challenging it. Until then, Blackwater owns this parcel, and we'll be exercising our ownership rights. I'll sue. I'll fight this. That's your prerogative. But I should warn you, litigation against a corporation with our resources could take years and cost you hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Most family operations can't afford that kind of fight. Marcus left the office in a daze. He drove home in silence, walked past Sarah without speaking, and went into his shop where he kept his guns. He didn't touch them, just stood there, looking at them, thinking. That night, he explained to Sarah what happened. She cried, not from sadness, from rage and helplessness. Can we sue? With what money? We barely make loan payments now. Keene knows that. They all know that. It's how this works. Big companies use the legal system as a weapon. They can afford years of litigation. We can't. Then what do we do? Marcus didn't answer. He'd been asking himself the same question for 6 hours. Over the next 14 months, Marcus Webb tried every legal avenue available. He hired a lawyer in Kalispell who specialized in property law, a man named Donald Pierce, who'd practiced in Montana for 30 years. Pierce was old-school Montana. Grandfather had ranched near Choteau, understood what land meant to people like Marcus. Their first meeting was in Pierce's office above a hardware store on Main Street. The walls were covered with maps of Montana counties, survey plats, and framed deeds going back to territorial days. Pierce reviewed the case for 3 hours, reading every document Marcus brought, making notes in handwriting so small Marcus couldn't decipher it. Finally, Pierce set down his pen and delivered the verdict. The tax sale appears to have followed proper legal procedure. The notice was mailed to your address of record. The county claims certified delivery confirmation. Whether you actually received it is unprovable after this much time. Even if we filed suit challenging the sale, we'd be arguing against documented legal process. It's an uphill battle. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. So I just lose everything? 70 years of family history? Gone because of a letter I never received? Pierce removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. He looked tired, like a man who'd seen this play out too many times. Here's the reality, Marcus. Montana law allows tax sales after proper notification. The county will testify they followed procedure. Blackwater's lawyers will have documentation showing every step was legal. We'd be asking a judge to overturn a completed legal process based on your word that you never received notice. Judges don't like doing that, but I didn't receive it. I pay my taxes, always have. Check county records. I've never been late. I believe you. But proving a negative, proving you didn't receive something, is nearly impossible in court. The burden would be on us to show the county's delivery confirmation is fraudulent or mistaken. That's a hard case to make. Marcus leaned forward. What if we subpoena postal records, prove it was never delivered? Postal Service purges delivery records after 90 days. This happened over a year ago. The records don't exist anymore. Then we argue the notice itself was insufficient, hidden in fine print, deliberately obscure. Pierce shook his head. I reviewed the notice format. It meets Montana statutory requirements. Clear headline, property description, payment deadline. consequences. A judge will say you had adequate notice. So I just lose everything? Marcus repeated. You can file suit anyway, challenge the sale, argue improper procedure, insufficient notice, anything we can think of. But I need to be honest with you about costs and odds. Legal fees will probably run $50,000 to $100,000 over 2 to 3 years of litigation. Appeals could add another $30,000. Our odds of winning are maybe 30%, being generous. If we lose, you could be liable for Blackwater's legal fees as well, which could be twice what you spend. Marcus did the math in his head. His entire savings was $8,000. The property itself was worth maybe $200,000 without the timber, $900,000 with it. To fight for it, he'd need to borrow $100,000 against assets he didn't have, with a 70% chance of losing and ending up deeper in debt. I have to be honest with you, Marcus, Pierce continued. This is how these companies operate. They're very good at finding legal mechanisms to acquire property from people who can't afford to fight back. Tax sales are perfect for that. It's all legal, all documented, and challenging. It requires resources most families don't have. So the system protects them, not us. The system protects people who can afford lawyers. That's the unfortunate truth. Pierce stood up, walked to his window overlooking Main Street. I've been practicing law in Montana for 30 years. I've seen more family operations destroyed by corporate legal maneuvering than I can count. Ranches taken through eminent domain for development, timberland seized for unpaid taxes, water rights stolen through procedural technicalities. It's always legal, it's always documented, and it's always devastating to the families involved. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and corrosive. Then what's the point of the law? What's it protecting if not people like me? The law protects property rights, Marcus, but in practice, it protects the property rights of people who can afford to enforce them. That's not how it should be, but it's how it is. Marcus paid Pierce's consultation fee, $500 he didn't have, borrowed from his brother-in-law with promises of repayment he wasn't sure he could keep. He left the office, understanding that the law wouldn't help him. The system that was supposed to protect property rights only protected people rich enough to afford the game. Marcus paid Pierce's consultation fee, $500 he didn't have, and left with the understanding that the law wouldn't help him. The system that was supposed to protect property rights only protected people rich enough to afford lawyers. He appealed to the county commissioners, attended meetings, presented his case. They sympathized, truly they did, but their hands were tied. The tax sale had followed state law. They couldn't reverse a legal process without court order. He contacted his congressman's office. A staffer sent a form letter expressing concern and suggesting he seek legal counsel. He reached out to environmental groups, thinking they might help preserve old-growth timber. They weren't interested. The parcel was too small, not significant enough for their causes. He tried negotiating directly with Blackwater again, offering to work out a payment plan to buy back the land. He met with Walter Keene 3 more times over those 14 months. Each time, Keene refused. The timber value exceeds what you could possibly pay, Mr. Webb. This isn't personal. It's business. We're in the timber business. By October 1994, Marcus understood that every legal option had been exhausted. The system had failed. Or more accurately, the system was working exactly as designed, protecting corporate interests while crushing individuals who couldn't afford to play the game. Blackwater Timber announced they'd begin harvest operations on the Webb property in November, right after hunting season closed. They posted notices, filed permits, arranged contracts with mills. Everything legal, everything proper, everything devastating. Sarah asked him one night in late October, "What are you going to do?" Marcus was cleaning his rifle, a Remington 703-08 that his father had given him for his 16th birthday. He'd killed his first elk with this rifle, had shot deer, bear, and mountain lion across 25 years. It was accurate to 600 yards in his hands, longer if conditions were right. I don't know yet, but that was a lie. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He'd known for months, had been planning it carefully, thinking through every detail the way his ranger instructors taught him decades earlier. Mission planning, objective, resources, terrain, obstacles, timeline, exit strategy. November 1st, Marcus drove to the property alone. Blackwater had posted no trespassing signs on land his grandfather had homesteaded. He cut through the fence with wire cutters, a deliberate act of reclaiming what was his, and spent 6 hours walking every acre, memorizing terrain he already knew by heart. He identified sight lines, high points with overlapping fields of fire, distances measured by laser rangefinder, wind patterns at different times of day, approach routes Blackwater crew would likely use, where they'd park, vehicles, where they'd stage equipment, where they'd be most vulnerable. This wasn't rage anymore. This was calculation. Marcus wasn't a killer by nature, but he'd been trained as one by the U.S. Army. Ranger School teaches you to plan operations, eliminate targets, complete missions. Those skills don't disappear just because you're no longer wearing a uniform. The plan was simple. Blackwater would send a crew to begin harvest operations. Marcus would be waiting in elevated positions with clear sight lines. He would engage targets at distances that prevented return fire. He would work methodically, professionally, ensuring no survivors could identify him or escape to summon help. Then, he would withdraw to a secondary position and wait for law enforcement response. November 15th, Blackwater scheduled their first harvest day. Marcus knew this because he'd called their office pretending to be a mill operator asking about delivery schedule. The woman who answered gave him everything: date, crew size, arrival time, planned work hours. The night before, Marcus barely slept. He kept thinking about his children. Thomas was 18 now, working construction in Kalispell. Ellen was 16, junior in high school, talking about college someday. Michael was 13, still a kid who believed his father could fix anything. What would this do to them? Sarah lay next to him in the dark. She knew something was wrong, but didn't ask. Some questions are dangerous because you might not like the answers. At 4 a.m., Marcus got up. He dressed in forest camo, old military surplus, loaded his rifle, chambered a round, filled his pockets with ammunition. He had 40 rounds, more than enough. Ranger training said 3 rounds per target, accounting for misses and confirmation shots. He kissed Sarah while she pretended to sleep, walked out to his truck, and drove to the property. He parked 2 miles away, hidden in thick timber, and covered the vehicle with branches and a camo tarp. Then he walked to his first position, a rocky outcrop overlooking the main access road, 380 yards from where Blackwater would stage operations. The sun rose at 6:47 a.m., turning the frost on pine needles into diamonds. Marcus sat behind a fallen log, rifle rested on his pack, scope zeroed, breathing controlled. He felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no excitement, just cold purpose. At 7:23 a.m., he heard engines. 2 trucks appeared on the access road, raising dust. A Ford F-250 crew cab, white with Blackwater logo. Behind it, a larger truck pulling a trailer with a skidder. They stopped exactly where Marcus predicted they would, in the small clearing where his grandfather used to park the logging truck. 7 men exited the vehicles. Marcus identified them through his scope. Walter Keene, wearing what looked like brand-new Carhartt coveralls, James Rutledge in military field jacket, Carl Morrison with survey equipment, Dean Foster and Rick Patterson carrying chainsaws, Tyler and Brian Simmons checking the skidder. They stood in a loose group near the trucks, drinking coffee from thermoses, discussing the day's work. Marcus could hear fragments of conversation carried on morning air. Rutledge saying something about tree density. Keene checking his watch. The Simmons brothers laughing at some joke. These were the last normal moments of their lives. Marcus breathed. Long exhale, let half out. Hold. Squeeze trigger smoothly. Don't jerk. The rifle cracked, sound rolling across the valley like thunder. Walter Keene's head snapped back. He dropped without a sound, coffee cup falling from his hand, body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Human brains can't process the impossible. A man standing alive one moment, dead the next, with no warning, no context, no explanation. They stood frozen, staring at Keene's body, trying to understand. Then Rutledge started screaming, "Get down! Shooter! Get down!" But they didn't know where to get down to, didn't know which direction the threat came from. Sound echoes weird in mountains, could have been any direction. Marcus worked mechanically. Sight picture, controlled breathing, smooth trigger press. Second shot took Carl Morrison in the chest as he turned toward the trucks. He staggered, clutched at his ribs, made a sound like air escaping a tire, and collapsed. Dean Foster was running now, sprinting toward the tree line. Smart move. Get to cover, get distance, get invisible. Marcus led him by 3 feet, accounting for running speed and distance, and fired. Foster went down hard, tumbled forward, didn't move again. Rick Patterson froze behind a truck tire, trying to make himself small. Bad tactics. Vehicles provide concealment, not cover. Bullets punch through sheet metal like paper. Marcus put 2 rounds through the truck door. Patterson fell backwards, visible beneath the frame, clearly hit but still moving. The Simmons brothers were in the skidder cab, Tyler trying to start it, Brian yelling something. Marcus put a round through the windshield, spider webbing the glass. He couldn't see if he'd hit anyone, but the engine stopped attempting to turn over. James Rutledge was the dangerous one, former Marine. He'd found cover behind a log pile, and he'd armed himself with something. Marcus couldn't see what, but Rutledge was scanning the tree line, trying to locate the shooter, moving tactically. Marcus changed positions, moving 40 yards north to a secondary spot he'd prepared. Different sight line, different angle. This took 3 minutes. Low crawl through undergrowth, controlling breath, staying invisible. From the new position, Marcus could see behind the log pile. Rutledge was there, holding a pistol, speaking into a cell phone. Calling for help, giving a position report, that made him priority one. Marcus settled, found his breathing, and fired. The bullet caught Rutledge high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the phone, fell. Behind the logs, out of sight. Marcus waited. Patience is a sniper's best weapon. 2 minutes passed. Nothing moved except pine branches swaying in light wind. Then Rick Patterson, the Sawyer Marcus had shot through the truck door, began screaming. High-pitched, agonized, the sound of someone realizing they're dying and terrified of it. The screaming went on for 30 seconds, 45, a minute. Then it stopped. Marcus shifted to his third position, a tree stand he'd built 60 feet up in a massive Douglas fir. It took him 5 minutes to climb, using rope assists he'd pre-positioned. From there, he had 360-degree visibility of the entire killing zone. The skitter cab was empty. Tyler and Brian Simmons had bailed out, but Marcus couldn't see where they'd gone. Keene, Morrison, Foster, and Patterson were clearly dead, bodies visible and unmoving. Rutledge was down, but possibly alive behind the log pile. The Simmons brothers were either hiding in the forest or running. Marcus stayed in the tree stand for 40 minutes, scanning through his scope, waiting for movement. At 8:47 a.m., Tyler Simmons broke cover, sprinting from the tree line toward the trucks, probably trying to reach the radio or phone. Bad decision born of panic. Marcus tracked him, led by 4 feet, and fired. Tyler went down 20 yards from the trucks. Brian Simmons emerged seconds later, running to his brother. Marcus hesitated for 3 seconds. Brian wasn't armed, wasn't a threat, was just trying to help his brother. Then Marcus remembered what they'd come here to do. Cut down his grandfather's trees, harvest his family legacy, turn sacred ground into quarterly profits. He fired. Brian fell across Tyler's body. James Rutledge made his move then, dragging himself from behind the log pile, bleeding heavily from his shoulder, trying to reach the trucks. He was 58 years old, moving slow, clearly injured badly. He crawled maybe 10 yards before collapsing. Marcus climbed down from the tree stand. He walked into the killing zone, rifle ready, checking each body. Keene, Morrison, Foster, Patterson, Tyler Simmons, Brian Simmons, all dead. Rutledge was still breathing, barely, blood pooling beneath him, eyes open but unfocused. "Why?" Rutledge whispered. Marcus looked at him. "You were taking my land. Just following orders? So were the Nazis." Rutledge died while Marcus was walking back to his truck. At 10:15 a.m., a Blackwater supervisor named Dennis Cole drove to the harvest site to check on crew progress. He found 7 bodies, blood already darkening in the sun, flies gathering. He vomited, called 911, and waited by the road until state police arrived. Flathead County Sheriff's Department and Montana State Police responded with every available unit. FBI was notified immediately. Mass shooting and potential terrorism. The scene was chaos. 7 dead civilians, no suspects, no clear motive, no witnesses. Special Agent Rachel Torres, FBI, arrived from the Kalispell office at Tayo Itzap at 1:30 p.m. She walked the scene, studied the bodies, noted the shot patterns and distances. She'd worked sniper cases before, and this was textbook. Elevated positions, long range, disciplined fire. Shooter knew what he was doing. This wasn't random, she told the sheriff. This was planned. Military training. Someone with a serious grudge. It took investigators 3 hours to identify a suspect. Walter Keene had case files in his truck, including documentation on the Webb property acquisition. Detectives saw immediately. Disputed land, angry former owner, motive clear as daylight. Marcus Webb's name was flagged in law enforcement databases. Former Army Ranger, expert marksman, multiple weapons registered. They ran his truck registration. Vehicle not at his residence. Checked with his wife. Husband left early, didn't say where he was going. By 4 p.m., 30 law enforcement officers were converging on Marcus Webb's location, though they didn't know exactly where that was. Sheriff's Department cordoned off the Webb property. State police sent tactical teams into the forest. FBI coordinated the manhunt. Marcus was exactly where he planned to be, back in his tree stand overlooking the killing zone. He'd known they'd come looking. He'd known this would end with either prison or death. He'd accepted both outcomes. When the first tactical team entered the clearing at 4:47 p.m., Marcus watched them through his scope. 12 officers, body armor, assault rifles, moving professionally. They secured the scene, photographed evidence, began processing a crime scene that sprawled across half a mile. Marcus could have shot them, could have taken 4 or 5 before they located him, but he didn't. These men weren't trying to steal his land. They were doing their jobs, enforcing laws, protecting society. Marcus had no quarrel with them. At 6:30 p.m., as sunset turned the mountains gold, Marcus climbed down from the tree. He walked into the clearing, rifle slung over his shoulder, hands clearly visible. A dozen guns pointed at him instantly. "I'm Marcus Webb," he called out. "I'm surrendering." Tactical officers swarmed him, forced him face down, cuffed him, searched him for weapons. They found the rifle, a pistol on his belt, and nothing else. No manifesto, no suicide note, no explanation. Agent Torres approached. "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for 7 counts of murder. You have the right to remain silent." Marcus nodded. He already knew his rights. He'd known them before pulling the trigger. The trial began in March 1995, in federal court in Missoula. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Bodies, bullets matched to Marcus's rifle, motive documented in corporate files, and Marcus's own admission. He never denied doing it. His defense attorney, a public defender named Catherine Marsh, argued temporary insanity, extreme emotional disturbance, anything to avoid 7 murder-1 convictions. But Marcus wouldn't cooperate. He told Marsh directly, "Don't lie for me. I knew what I was doing. I understood consequences. I made a choice. Don't diminish that with excuses." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Sarah Webb testified about the land dispute, her husband's increasing stress, their financial desperation. Thomas Webb, their oldest son, testified that his father was a good man pushed beyond breaking. Ellen refused to testify. Michael was too young. Expert witnesses explained that losing generational family land created intense psychological trauma. Psychiatrists argued Marcus had experienced a psychotic break. None of it mattered. Marcus sat silently throughout, accepting his fate. The prosecution painted him as a domestic terrorist who murdered 7 innocent men over a property dispute. The defense painted him as a desperate man, failed by a system designed to protect corporate interests. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all 7 counts. First-degree murder, premeditated, deliberate, without justification. At sentencing, the judge offered Marcus a chance to speak. He stood, looked at the families of the men he'd killed sitting in the gallery, and said, "I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Those men didn't deserve to die, but they came to take something that wasn't theirs, and I made a choice to stop them the only way I knew how. The law failed me. The system protected them. I don't expect you to understand, but I needed you to know I'm not sorry for defending my land. I'm only sorry that defending it required such violence." The gallery erupted, family members screaming, crying, cursing him. Bailiffs restoring order. The judge sentenced Marcus to 7 consecutive life terms, no possibility of parole, and he'd die in prison. Montana State Prison, Deer Lodge, maximum security. Marcus Webb, inmate 94-2478, arrived in June 1995. He was 42 years old. He would never leave. Prison is designed to break men, strip away identity, reduce you to a number in a routine. But Marcus had already been broken the day he learned his land was stolen. Prison was just the place he lived while waiting to die. He adjusted quickly. Former military do well in environments with rigid structure and clear rules. He kept his head down, followed regulations, didn't cause trouble. Other inmates left him alone. 7 murders buys respect even in maximum security. Sarah visited twice a month for the first year, then once a month, then every other month. By 1997, she'd stopped coming entirely. Thomas visited occasionally, angry and conflicted, trying to understand how his father became a killer. Ellen never visited once. Michael visited religiously until he left Montana in 2002. Then calls replaced visits. Then calls became annual. Marcus didn't blame them. He'd destroyed their family as thoroughly as he'd destroyed the Keene, Rutledge, Morrison, Foster, Patterson, and Simmons families. His grandchildren, born after his incarceration, grew up knowing Grandpa only as the monster in news articles. In 2003, Sarah filed for divorce. Marcus signed the papers without contest. She remarried in 2005, a good man from Big Fork who treated her well, who never asked about her previous life. The property, the 200 acres Marcus killed to protect, was harvested by Blackwater Timber in November 1995, while Marcus awaited trial. They clear-cut everything except the area around Thomas Webb's grave, as Montana law required. The old-growth pines, 150 years old, trees that had witnessed Montana history, were cut, processed, and sold. The land yielded $680,000 in timber. Blackwater Timber sold the property in 1998 to a developer who subdivided it into 45-acre lots. Today, it's called Blackwater Estates. a neighborhood of vacation homes and retired couples from California and Washington. The people living there don't know what happened, don't know about Thomas Webb homesteading in 1923, or Daniel Webb working that land for 50 years, or Marcus Webb willing to kill to keep it. Thomas Webb's grave still stands, maintained by Thomas Webb Jr., who visits every year on his great-grandfather's birthday, the only person who remembers anymore. The family's Marcus destroyed, never recovered. Walter Keene's wife, Patricia, died in 2001 from heart attack her family attributed to stress. Their 2 children, both in college when their father was murdered, struggled with depression and PTSD. James Rutledge's widow, Marie, received his Marine Corps pension but could barely afford raising their 4 children alone. The Simmons brothers left behind parents who buried both sons in the same funeral. Grief so profound they became ghosts themselves, alive but not living. Total damage: 7 men dead, 7 widows, 16 children without fathers, and 1 family destroyed, trying to protect what they believed was theirs. Agent Torres, who'd led the investigation, retired in 2012. In a podcast interview about the case, she said, "Marcus Webb wasn't insane. He wasn't even wrong about being wronged. The system did fail him. Corporate legal maneuvering took his land in ways that looked legal but felt like theft. But killing 7 men doesn't balance that scale. It just adds more weight." Marcus Webb is now 71 years old. He's been in prison for 30 years. He works in the prison library, tutors inmates working on GEDs, and spends evenings reading history books about the American West, about homesteaders and pioneers, about the end of the frontier. He's given only one interview, in 2019, to a researcher studying vigilante violence. Asked if he regretted his actions, Marcus said, "I regret that I lived in a world where killing 7 men seemed like the only option left. I regret that the law protects property rights for corporations, but not for families. I regret that my children had to pay for my decisions. But do I regret trying to protect land my grandfather homesteaded? No. I'd have died trying to protect it legally if the law worked. Since it didn't, I protected it the only way left. Those men died because they chose to take what wasn't theirs." Asked what he'd tell young people facing similar situations, Marcus said, "Don't do what I did. The cost is too high. 7 men are dead, 7 families destroyed, my own family destroyed, and the land still got logged anyway. Violence didn't solve anything. It just created more graves." But then he added, "Though I'll also tell them this, the system is rigged. Corporate lawyers will steal your legacy while smiling and calling it legal. If you can't afford justice, justice won't protect you. I don't know what the answer is anymore. I thought I did in 1994. Now I just know what the answer isn't." The question that haunts this case isn't whether Marcus Webb committed murder. He did, premeditated and deliberate. The question is whether a system that allows corporate legal maneuvering to take generational family land for unpaid taxes that the owner was never properly notified about shares responsibility for creating the desperation that led to violence. Was Marcus Webb a murderer? Yes. 7 men dead by his hand, intentional and planned. Was he a victim of systemic injustice? Also yes. Corporate consolidation destroying family operations, legal systems favoring those who can afford lawyers, and economic structures that crush individuals unable to compete with billion-dollar corporations. Both things can be true simultaneously, and that's the uncomfortable truth this story forces us to acknowledge. Sometimes the law protects the wrong people. Sometimes desperation creates violence, and sometimes the only difference between a murderer and a desperate father is which side of the property line you're standing on. Marcus Webb will die in prison. The land his grandfather homesteaded is now vacation homes for wealthy retirees. The 7 men he killed left behind families still grieving 30 years later. And the question remains, in a world where the system fails people, where legal mechanisms steal what feels sacred, where no legitimate remedy exists for grievances, what is a desperate man supposed to do? There's no good answer. Just 7 bodies, 7 life sentences, and a 200-acre parcel that got logged anyway. If this story made you think about justice, desperation, and the systems that sometimes fail the people they're supposed to protect, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe for more true stories that examine the complicated intersections of law, morality, and human desperation. Comment below. Where do you draw the line between defending what's yours and taking lives that aren't yours to take? Because these stories keep happening in different forms, in forgotten places where the system fails and desperation takes hold. Until next time, remember, monsters aren't born. They're created. One stolen inheritance, one legal failure, one August morning in Montana at a time.